Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, that is going to be quite a sign to have Black Moon Lilith in, because Black Moon Lilith is associated with Scorpio in terms of the themes, or you could say Pluto, one of the rulers of Scorpio, along with Mars. The scorpionic energy that is all about the shadow, what lies beneath, and what is driving people on a subconscious level, and what they have a hard time acknowledging, and also unpleasant emotions, which of course the shadow is all about that. But like vengefulness is a big one. So Black Moon Lilith can be the area where somebody feels shame and the sense of repression. And there's sometimes there is the feminist angle about the the patriarchy and all that stuff. But the reason I don't really want to emphasize that is because men have Black Moon Lilith too. And if I was just doing this for women, it might be a lot easier to just talk about that. But I don't really want to go there. I just want to kind of look at it as a rebellious energy. How, what area of life do you feel a sense of the shadow really taking over, the shame? Yeah, shame is part of the shadow too, because the person doesn't want to acknowledge this side of themselves. So that repression, and maybe, where the person has been shamed by others. So in the sign of Scorpio, we're going to see the themes that Black Moon Lilith represents already being emphasized, because Scorpio is already like that. And before I continue, I did consult a couple of websites, elsaelsa.com and tianrosemary.com. And I always do that for these types of readings, just to get it straight, because if I just do it myself, sometimes I feel like I'm not that I'm saying something wrong, but just that I want to be on the same page with what I'm saying. And a lot of times when I look up different sites, I don't choose them to discuss what they've said, because I just don't resonate with what they're saying. So you also have to look at what house Lilith is in. And I've already done videos on Black Moon Lilith in the houses. So you can check my website. I mean, not my website, my channel, for more information on that. So this gives you an added depth to whatever house it's in by looking at what sign it's in. So what you would do is you would use both of those, and it's like what we call synthesize things. You're going to bring elements of both into it. Like, for instance, let's say you have Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio in the first house. Well, this may affect the way that you even look. Like, you may want to be that seductress because you want that power that you get by having people lust after you. And but it can be like luring people into that web if you're looking for relationships, for instance. The sites that I chose, neither one seemed to talk about sexuality, which I was kind of surprised. Maybe the other one did, I can't remember. But I would say personally that with Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, the issue of sexuality can be one of shame, and that suggests that there might have been abuse. And abuse is not just sexual assault, molestation, or things like that. It can be someone, let's say it's a mother's boyfriend who makes inappropriate comments. Maybe that person never touches you, but you feel that kind of sexual violation, or maybe premature sexualization through something that happened that was unwanted that had to do with sex. So people don't realize that it's not just being touched or being, assaulted or anything like that. It could be something that is on the psychological level. And, like suggestive comments or what have you. And the other thing is that this reminds me of other placements that I have discussed in the past where I'm going to say the woman, because 9 times out of 10 it will play out that way, where it's a female experiencing this, being abused sexually, and then turning the tables when she gets to be an adult and saying, now I'm going to be a stripper and I'm going to make all this money and I'm going to tease men. I'm not going to give them sex, but they're going to, empty their wallets for the illusion of thinking that they're going to have sex with me, but I'm not going to do it. Or even if the person is a prostitute or something, they want to get paid for the thing that they were doing for free when they were very young that was unwanted. So it's like still thinking of themselves in this way, but it's trying to be self-empowered. I didn't see that scenario mentioned. The other site, Elsa mentioned being a survivor. And yes, you are a survivor, but I like to elaborate on that because I feel that there's even more to a story than just simply being a survivor. I think it is someone who wants to, it's almost like a form of vengeance. So when I was talking about the emotional patterns, that can be what comes up for this placement. That is a theme that really has to be dealt with, is a tendency to have lack of forgiveness and a vengeful spirit because of what has transpired. Somebody who has prominent Libra, including Mars in Libra, that even, if you are, naturally a very tolerant kind of person and you try to see all points of view, if you have been wronged by someone and you have Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio and yet you're a Libra, you may still feel like this person needs to pay for what they've done, and you may look at it as a legal matter. So maybe you seek out the courts to do it, and that's your way of taking revenge. Whereas another person may just be hoping that someone gets their comeuppance, but sometimes it can harden the heart, and the person has to be careful that they're not going through life being too unforgiving, because it could definitely backfire on them in terms of their own emotional well-being. So you have to look at it from that perspective. There was mention of self-destructive tendencies, which I found kind of interesting because I would normally think that this would be more of Pisces tendency to do this. And I think with Scorpio, what is really going on in terms of self-destruction is a desire to live life, not just on the edge, but in that seedy underbelly existence. So I'm going to use the example of the heroin addict, the person who decides to do something like, if they're going to take drugs, they don't just smoke weed, they take heroin, because it's like it seems even more of the underworld. It seems like more taboo. There's Scorpio is associated with taboos, and so it might make you gravitate towards the darker side of life, and that could lead to issues of self-destruction. But it's a little bit different than Pisces, because Pisces is coming from a victim mentality. With Scorpio, even if you have been the victim, it's more about wanting to embrace the shadow. And you think that in order to do so, you have to live in the shadows. And, it's almost like being a documentarian of the underworld, and you're going to volunteer to embed yourself in it in order to obtain all this information. That's how I really see it. I see it that, and sometimes I think another thing that can manifest, if you came from a background where you were a survivor, meaning that you feel lucky to even be alive or to be sane based on what you have been through, then it might be that this is what feels real to you. And when you live a life where everything is nicey nice and on the up and up, the straight and narrow, that is something that doesn't appeal to you because it seems vanilla. It seems bland, like a bland existence. I think what might be going on there is that Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, but it's also ruled by Mars. And Mars is the god of war, and it can indicate like thrill-seeking behavior. So that kind of risky behavior, why do people do that? Some people are kind of tempting fate, but some people, they have a need for speed. They really like living on the edge. And that would be that Mars kind of energy. It's just like choosing a profession, like being in the military or being a police officer. A lot of people say that's nuts. Why would you willingly put yourself in danger? And the reason is because some people feel alive, maybe only when they are in crisis situations. And Scorpio, the house that you rule, I'm talking about, I know you might not have Sun in Scorpio, but Lilith, Scorpions, the house that Scorpio rules is the 8th house. It's a house of transformation. So it does include death, but it also includes crisis. So this may be something that you're very drawn to. And by the way, speaking of being drawn to something, you may have your own charisma that other people pick up on. So what I would say is that to have the ability to stare your shadow in the face, or whatever it is that you think that you need to purge out of yourself, to be able to stare it in the face, but not to want to incorporate it into your life, to really just embrace it full on. One of the sites, just when I was perusing, mentioned what I think they meant to call ancestral karma. They used a different term, but that means the sins of the father that are carried down. And why that is significant is that, whether it's addiction issues, whether it's sexual issues, like sexual abuse that's passed down, or violence, domestic violence, all of these things can be passed down from generation to generation. And somebody steps up and they say, I am refusing to pass down this painful lineage. I'm going to break that pattern. And that's what this can do. One thing they mentioned sexually, which I think is very interesting to note, because one of the sites said that this could be what the person wants from sex. And something was described that sounded like it was bondage and discipline or S&M, things like that. There's that other name where somebody is like the dominatrix, if that's how you say it. That is, I think, something that at one point, because I was brainwashed by people who say, oh, you know what? Whatever two consenting adults do is fine and dandy. I mean, if it doesn't hurt other people. And then I was thinking about it because, sometimes you encounter people, if you look at their Twitter account, and you can tell they're into this kind of these sexual fetishes or role playing and stuff like that. And they'll put like even their professional life of being a dominatrix, I don't know if I'm saying it properly, but the woman who is doing something like that and the man who is being passive or submissive. Okay. Now, and then of course there is bondage and discipline, the inflicting pain, okay, for sexual pleasure. Now, I really did believe, oh yes, you have to respect that's a way that they choose to express themselves sexually. And then I realized that what is probably happening, because I actually, was reading stuff about people that experience some sort of sexual it's like sexual imprinting from physical abuse by an adult. So for instance, a child is hit and something happens where it gets confused with sexual arousal. So if that person wants to get beaten as an adult and they are hiring a dominatrix or their partner becomes that person, they're just reliving trauma. But it's never going away because they're putting themselves in that victim position. They may feel empowered because they're willingly do it. They're not doing it. They're not being forced to do it as when they were a child, but they're still participating in that dynamic of being on the receiving end of abuse. So even though they've attached pleasure to that. So this is something that I could see that it kind of, you could say, warps the mentality of somebody who experiences that, where they think that, hey, I am empowering myself by dominating these men. I never see same-sex dominatrixes where there are women doing it to other women. Maybe, I'm sure there's everything out there, so they probably exist, but I've never seen, somebody advertising for it towards other women. But the point is that kind of thing that people will just say, oh, it's role playing and things like that. Well, it can get, not too long ago, I saw a young man leading another man in public around on a dog with a dog collar around one of their necks, and he was like leading him on a leash. Okay, well, maybe they get off on that kind of thing, but they're bringing it into the public eye. So these kinds of things, I feel, just like ancestral karma, that it comes up where it's being repeated, that the same thing can happen through the choice of sexual behavior, is that they keep triggering, re-triggering trauma. And that could be the shadow, one of the shadow elements that they have to really wrap their brain around, so that they can see that their abuse was not cute. It wasn't anything to emulate or to recreate or relive, but to transcend. But you can't transcend these things by trying to avoid them. You have to really face it and make sure that you're not somebody with this position, especially if your sun is in Scorpio, you may really justify, or even an air sign where you can really talk yourself into anything, but it might be something that you have no idea how much it did affect you adversely. And perhaps the purging that needs to be done is the pain that somehow never got expressed, that gets turned into, I'm going to exact revenge by being this person, but you're still being a sexual object. That's the problem with it. It's not really casting you in a new light. Even if you feel that you have more control over your situation, you're still choosing. There's a certain objectification, because when somebody is abused, or when somebody is fetishized, or whatever I don't know if that's pronouncing it correctly, but they're being reduced to a body part or a sex act, or or any kind of act. The other person is not seeing the whole person, and that's just the truth. And they are seeing that one thing, and they're so absorbed in one thing. And that is, for the other person, that is not benign, because it can lead them to feel like they are not really being seen in their totality. And just like they say that Lilith was a wild woman, and she was not able, I don't know if she was kicked out of the Garden of Eden or she left on her own accord, but she couldn't roll with that. That kind of thing is because when other people see you in a limited role, it isn't pleasant, it isn't fun, it isn't something that you want, it's unwanted. But how do you change that is the truth. Well, you have to act like a whole person. And so that seductress vibe that you may trick yourself into believing that is you're doing in order to bewitch somebody so that you can feel in control of situations, may actually be keeping you restricted and small, and not shining your light in all of its glory. Just kind of, it keeps you compartmentalized in other people's lives. And on the emotional level, learning how to forgive in a full sort of way, and learning exactly what forgiveness is, which is not necessarily interacting with the person who abused you, which is not necessarily, which is definitely not minimizing what was done to you, but to reframe it in a higher perspective where you can see, why did that person do it? Ultimately, everyone does everything in order to feel better about themselves and to be happy. So imagine if somebody does something heinous to another person trying to be happy, how wretched that is, and how their life must be very limited and very dark. And so definitely when I talk about when I talk about the sign of Scorpio, I often use the term intense, but you could say dark. You could say that there's a dark that living in the darkness, or the dark side, is very appealing to Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio. And when you engage in self-care, it's funny, we talk about all of these practices that help people to relax and to unwind, But the thing is, it's also about, it's caring for the self, not just what you're physically doing, but just on an emotional level, that you really give a damn if you thrive or not. Where you're not playing small and you're not willing to just settle for crumbs from others, but you really want to have deep relationships. And that's the Scorpios that loves that depth, that intensity, that depth. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.